I've worked as a pizza delivery driver for almost a year now. It's a pretty easy job. Grab the pizza, drive, and deliver. Most people are friendly, and I get to listen to my favorite music all night. I never expected much excitement. But that night was different. That night was the last night I ever delivered a pizza. It was late, around midnight. I was just about to close up and go home when the phone rang. My manager, Mr. Lucas, picked it up and scribbled down an address. Then he looked at me, his eyes a little wide. "Ben, you've got one last delivery," he said. I sighed. "Really? It's so late. Can't it wait till tomorrow?" "It's the last order of the night, and the tip is big," he added, raising his eyebrows as if to sweeten the deal. That was hard to resist, so I shrugged, took the ticket, and looked at the address. It was somewhere on the edge of town, an address I'd never heard of, a big old mansion on a hill. I glanced up at Mr. Lucas. "You sure this is right?" He nodded. "That's what they gave me. Some mansion." A shiver ran down my spine, but I wasn't about to back out. I grabbed the pizza, got in my car, and set off into the night. The drive felt strange. The town was empty, and the streets were silent. No headlights from other cars, just fog drifting in thick and heavy, like something out of a horror movie. The farther I went, the more I felt that something was watching me. Maybe it was just the emptiness, or maybe it was because of the road I was driving down. A narrow, winding path lined with tall trees, their branches like claws reaching across the street. Eventually, I saw the mansion. It sat on a hill, shrouded in ivy and shadows, with windows that looked broken and a front porch that seemed ready to collapse. It was an eerie place, the kind of house you see in ghost stories or nightmares. But I shook off the feeling of dread and parked my car, telling myself it was just another delivery. The porch creaked under my weight as I walked up the steps, holding the pizza in one hand. When I reached the door, I knocked and waited. Nothing happened. The silence pressed in around me, thick and heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. I knocked again, louder this time. Suddenly, the door creaked open. It swung slowly, as if pulled by someone inside. I peered into the darkness but saw no one. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, and a strange smell drifted out from the house, a mix of damp wood and something rotten. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Pizza delivery?" No answer, just silence, stretching out, thick and suffocating. I took a hesitant step inside, my eyes straining to see in the dim light. The door swung shut behind me, slamming with a heavy thud that echoed through the house. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. I should have left right then. I should have dropped the pizza and run. But something kept me there, something almost hypnotic about the place. I took another step forward, calling out again. "Hello? Anyone here?" That's when I saw him. At the far end of the hallway, a tall, thin figure stood in the shadows, barely visible in the faint light. He wore old-fashioned clothes, like something from another century, and his face was pale, almost ghostly. His eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to draw in all the light around him. For a long moment he just stared at me, and I stared back, frozen in place. Then, slowly, he raised a bony hand and motioned for me to follow. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I was in shock, or maybe it was the strange pull of his eyes. Whatever it was, I found myself walking toward him, my steps slow and unsteady. The hallway seemed to stretch out endlessly, lined with peeling wallpaper and faded portraits. I couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes in the paintings were watching me, following me as I walked. The whispering started then, a faint murmur that filled the air around me. I couldn't understand the words, but they made my skin crawl, like the voices were speaking directly into my mind. I wanted to turn back, but every time I thought about it, I'd feel that strange pull again, urging me forward. At last, we reached a door at the end of the hall. The figure stopped, looked at me with those dark, empty eyes, and then pushed the door open. Inside was a large, dimly lit room filled with dusty furniture and thick cobwebs. In the center of the room was a long table, and sitting around it were more figures, all dressed in the same old-fashioned clothes. They turned to look at me as I entered, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes as hollow and dark as the man's. They stared at me in silence, their gazes piercing through me like I was some sort of specimen. My heart pounded in my chest, and I forced myself to breathe, to calm down. I've got your pizza," I said, holding up the box with a shaky hand. None of them moved. They just kept staring, their faces completely blank. Then, slowly, one by one, they started to smile. It was a cold, unnatural smile that didn't reach their eyes, a smile that felt all wrong. Panic bubbled up inside me. I backed up, ready to bolt, but when I turned to leave, I saw that the hallway behind me was gone. In its place was a mirror, tall and dusty, reflecting the room and the figures around the table. But there was something wrong with my reflection. The version of me in the mirror wasn't holding the pizza. He was standing there, staring back at me with a twisted, unnatural smile, the same smile as the others. And behind him, in the mirror's reflection, I could see the figures standing, moving closer to him. To me, I turned around, but the room was empty. The figures had vanished. But in the mirror, they were there, surrounding me, their hands reaching out, their eyes empty and hollow. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My reflection stepped forward, closer to the glass, reaching out a hand as if to touch me. I stumbled back, but my reflection didn't move. It just stood there, grinning, its eyes locked on mine. Then, before I could react, it lunged forward, reaching out through the glass and grabbing me. I felt cold hands on my shoulders, pulling me toward the mirror, dragging me into the darkness. The last thing I saw was my reflection, smiling at me from the other side of the glass. The next morning, they found my car parked outside the old mansion, the engine still running and the pizza box on the passenger seat untouched. But they never found me. Now, if you ever find yourself driving down that lonely road late at night, be careful. You might catch a glimpse of a figure in your mirror, a figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile, watching you, waiting. I never expected that delivering food could be dangerous, let alone terrifying. But that's exactly what happened one cold October night. I was working the late shift at the local pizza place, taking in one last delivery before calling it a night. Just as I was cleaning up, the phone rang. My boss, Angie, picked it up and jotted down an address, her face tense. "Hey Carter," she called. One more. And it's way out past the old Miller Road. I felt a chill run down my spine. Miller Road was almost abandoned, lined with rundown houses and farmland nobody visited anymore. But Angie gave me a sympathetic look and held up a 20. "They tipped big," she added, as if that would somehow make it less creepy. I sighed, took the order, and got into my car, punching the address into my GPS. The drive felt unsettling from the start. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. And as I got closer to Miller Road, a thick fog began to settle, making it hard to see anything more than a few feet ahead. I rolled down my window and took a deep breath. It was eerily silent. No sounds, no crickets, nothing. Just the hum of my car and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. Every few seconds, I glanced at the GPS, wondering if I was getting close. And then I saw it. An old crumbling farmhouse, its roof sagging and paint peeling, surrounded by overgrown fields and a crooked barbed wire fence. My headlights barely illuminated the house, but I could make out a figure on the front porch. It looked like a woman, her hair long and tangled, wearing an old-fashioned dress that was faded and worn. As I parked, I saw her wave me over with slow, jerky movements. I took a deep breath, grabbed the pizza, and got out of the car. My footsteps crunched on the gravel, and I forced myself to act casual as I approached the porch. The woman was silent, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between anticipation and hunger. Pizza delivery?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer, just nodded slowly and extended a thin, bony hand, her fingers trembling as she reached out for the pizza box. Her nails were long and dirty, and her skin was pale, almost gray. She took the box and clutched it to her chest like it was something precious. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Would you mind coming inside?" That set off every alarm in my brain. I forced a polite smile and shook my head. "No thanks, I should probably get back. Busy night." Her expression changed, her face falling slightly, and something about the way she looked at me made my stomach twist. But she nodded and shuffled back toward the door, clutching the pizza tightly. I turned to leave, but then I heard her voice, low and strange, almost like she was chanting under her breath. I glanced back, but she was already inside, closing the door. As soon as it clicked shut, the house fell silent again. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, and made my way back to the car, eager to get away. But as I got closer, I saw that my back tire was flat. I stared at it in disbelief. It hadn't been flat when I drove up, and I hadn't heard anything pop or tear. It was like something had deflated it silently, waiting for me to notice. Swearing under my breath, I pulled out my phone to call Angie, but the screen was dead, no signal, of course. I looked around, trying to decide if I should knock on the door and ask to use their phone. But the thought of going back up to that porch made my skin crawl. So I decided to change the tire myself. I opened the trunk and grabbed the spare and jack, working as quickly as I could in the foggy darkness. Then I heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from behind me. I froze, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned around and saw something moving in the fog. It was the woman standing just a few feet away, her face partially hidden in the shadows. But she wasn't alone. Behind her were more figures, all just as still and silent, their faces pale and their eyes blank. They stood in a loose circle around me, watching, their expressions empty and cold. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "I'm just fixing my tire. I'll be out of your way in a second." The woman didn't respond. She just tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then she took a step forward, and the others followed, moving in perfect unison, their footsteps soundless on the gravel. I backed up, my pulse racing, but they kept coming. Their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Look, I'll just go," I said, my voice shaking. "No need to." But they didn't stop. They kept advancing, their expressions never changing, their footsteps slow and deliberate, like they were in no hurry. And then I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. They didn't blink, not once. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, like they weren't even human. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and then I turned and ran. I didn't care about the flat tire or my car. I just wanted to get away from those dead, empty eyes. I sprinted down the road, my breath coming in gasps, my mind racing with panic. But no matter how far I ran, the fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I couldn't see where I was going, and the gravel road seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows deepening with every step. Finally, I stopped, panting, my legs burning. I glanced back, hoping I'd lost them, but there they were, still following, their figures barely visible in the fog, moving with that same unnatural slowness. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice echoing in the silent night. But they didn't answer. They just kept coming, their faces blank and unfeeling, their eyes fixed on me with a hunger that I couldn't understand. Desperate, I looked around, and that's when I saw it, a small crumbling chapel at the edge of the field, half hidden by overgrown grass and weeds. I didn't think, I just ran for it, hoping that maybe somehow it would offer some kind of shelter. I stumbled up the steps, threw open the door and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with shaking hands. The chapel was dark and dusty, filled with the smell of mold and decay. I sank to the floor, trying to catch my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. But then I heard something, soft, scraping sounds, like nails against wood. They were at the door, scratching, tapping, trying to get in. I held my breath, praying they would go away, that they would leave me alone. The scratching stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then I heard a voice, a whisper, soft and chilling, coming from somewhere inside the chapel. "Carter," it said, drawing out my name in a slow, eerie hiss. "Why did you leave us?" I looked around, my heart racing, but there was no one there, just shadows and dust. But the voice continued, soft and mocking, filling the empty space. "We were waiting for you." I backed up, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do, but then I felt something cold against my back, something sharp and bony that grabbed my shoulder, holding me in place. I turned, and there she was, The woman from the porch, her face inches from mine, her eyes dark and hollow, her mouth twisted into a hungry smile. You can't leave," she whispered. "Not now." I tried to scream, but her cold hand clamped over my mouth, and everything went dark. The next morning, Angie found my car on the side of the road, the tire flat and the driver's door wide open. The spare tire and jack were still lying on the ground, untouched. But I was gone. No one ever saw me again. And if you ever find yourself driving down Miller Road late at night, be careful. If you look closely, you might see a figure standing on the side of the road, watching you with empty eyes, waiting for someone to join them in the fog. I should have known something was wrong when the call came in. It was nearly 3 a.m., and the diner was empty except for me and Linda, the night cook. We were used to long, quiet shifts, just a few truckers and night owls who stopped in every now and then. But the phone call was different. The voice on the other end was barely a whisper, raspy and dry. "I'd like to place an order," they said, and I remember the way they lingered on each word like they were savoring it. "Sure," I said, grabbing my notepad. "What can I get you?" "Nothing from the menu," the voice rasped, sending a chill down my spine. "I have a special request." I glanced at Linda, who was wiping down the counter, her face bored and sleepy. She didn't seem to notice my unease. All right. What can we do for you?" There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for me to hear faint breathing. Then, in a low, eerie tone, they said, "I'd like you to make me a visitor." I felt a shiver run through me, but I forced a nervous laugh, thinking it was just some creep trying to mess with me. "Funny," I said. "Now, do you want a burger, fries, anything?" Another pause. Then, a dry chuckle echoed through the receiver, making my skin crawl. "No need for food. Just wait by the back door." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. Linda must have noticed my expression because she raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong, Claire?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Just weird customer." She rolled her eyes. "Probably some drunk prank calling from one of the gas stations down the road. Don't worry about it." She went back to her cleaning, and I tried to shake off the strange feeling the call had left me with. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept glancing toward the back door, expecting, I don't even know what. Maybe I thought the prank caller would show up laughing just to freak me out. Then, after about 10 minutes, I heard it, a soft knock on the back door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. A slow, steady knock, like whoever was out there knew I was listening. "Claire, are you okay?" Linda called, noticing my pale face. But I couldn't answer. Something about that knock held me in place, like I was rooted to the spot. Then the knock came a third time, louder and more insistent. Before I could stop myself, I found myself walking toward the door, almost like I was in a trance. "Claire!" Linda's voice broke through my haze, snapping me back to reality. I turned to see her watching me with a concerned look. "Are you seriously going to answer that? It's probably just some kid messing with you." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. She was right. It was probably just some stupid prank. But as I looked back at the door, I felt a strange pull, like something was calling to me, urging me to open it. Against my better judgment, I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and reached for the doorknob. The instant I touched it, an icy chill shot through my fingers, traveling up my arm and sending a jolt of terror straight to my heart. I jerked my hand back, gasping, but it was too late. The doorknob began to turn on its own, creaking slowly as the door swung open. Beyond the threshold was nothing, just darkness, thick and impenetrable, stretching out into an endless void. No alley, no parking lot, just darkness. "What the hell?" Linda whispered, her eyes wide as she stared into the empty blackness. Then, something moved in the shadows. A figure, barely visible, cloaked in darkness. It stepped forward, one slow, deliberate step at a time, until it was standing just inside the doorway. The figure was tall and thin, its face hidden beneath the brim of an old, wide-brimmed hat. It wore a long, tattered coat that hung off its skeletal frame, and its hands were twisted and bony, like the claws of some ancient creature. But it was the eyes that terrified me the most, glowing a sickly, unnatural yellow, watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The figure tilted its head, regarding me with those piercing eyes. Then in a low, raspy voice it said, "I am the visitor." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, filling the diner with a sense of dread that was almost palpable. Linda backed up, her face pale, and I could hear her muttering under her breath, something about calling the police. But I couldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure in the doorway. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. The visitor didn't answer right away. It just stared at me, its eyes burning into mine. Then slowly, it raised one bony hand and pointed to the empty booth in the corner. "Sit with me," it whispered, the words like a command, filling me with a sense of dread I couldn't explain. I felt my feet moving on their own, carrying me toward the booth. I sat down, my hands trembling, my heart racing. The visitor followed, moving with a slow, unnatural grace, and slid into the seat across from me. For a long moment, we just sat there, staring at each other in silence. I could feel Linda's eyes on us from across the diner, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, frozen in place, watching. The visitor's gaze never left mine. I felt like I was drowning in those yellow eyes, like they were stripping away every layer of my soul, peering into the deepest, darkest parts of me. You took an order," it said, its voice low and hollow. "But you did not deliver." I frowned, confused. I didn't take any order. I just answered the PP phone." The visitor tilted its head, its expression unreadable. "You answered, and now you owe Mum." A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. What do you mean?" The visitor's lips curled into a twisted smile, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "A debt has been made. A price must be paid." I glanced at Linda, silently pleading for help, but she just stood there, her face pale and terrified, like she was in some sort of trance. The visitor leaned forward, its eyes narrowing, and in that moment I knew there was no escape. I could feel it, deep in my bones. A cold, suffocating sense of doom that told me this thing, whatever it was, had come to claim something from me. Something I couldn't get back. "Please," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "I don't understand. What do you want?" The visitor's eyes gleamed with a sick satisfaction. "I want a companion," it said, its voice dripping with malice. Before I could react, it reached across the table, its bony fingers wrapping around my wrist. I tried to pull away, but its grip was like iron, cold and unyielding. I felt a sharp, burning pain where it touched me, like it was branding me, marking me as its own. Then, everything went black. When I came to, the diner was empty. Linda was gone, and so was the visitor. I looked around, disoriented, my heart pounding, but there was no sign that anyone had been there at all. The booth was empty, the back door was closed, and the diner was silent, like nothing had happened. But when I looked down at my wrist, I saw it. A small, dark mark, like a burn, etched into my skin in the shape of a twisted, crooked V. I tried to scrub it off, tried to ignore it, but no matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. And every night since then, at exactly 3 a.m., I hear it. A faint knock on the back door, followed by the sound of a voice, low and hollow, whispering my name. I don't know how much longer I can ignore it. Every night, it grows louder, more insistent, like it's getting closer. And I know, deep down, that one day I'll have to answer. One day I'll have to pay the price. And when that day comes, I'll be gone. Just another name on the visitors list. Another soul claimed by the darkness.